Hi, my name is Nolan Hack. I am a black activist from Los Angeles, California.
I am John Kane. I am a Mohawk. I live on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. I host a couple of native radio programs, one in New York City and one on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. And I, too, am an activist on issues relating to social justice, racism, and environmental issues.
My name is Julie Dye. I live in Jackson, Michigan. I'm a Potawatomi Native activist, water protector, cultural appropriation activist.
Illari Chaska, interested in the liberation of Semanawak.
All right. So the topic, like I said, native erasure is about as powerful force as I've ever come across, and we need to figure out how to stop it. And especially from my folks' side of the table, how do black people help native people stop it? Before we started recording, we were talking about some of the athletes in the two major, I guess the two most major sports leagues in the country, the NFL and the NBA. How someone like LeBron James, who speaks out about the problems that his people face and the injustices in the country in certain areas, but then is a big Cleveland Indians fan and wears the jerseys and the whole 9 yards. And you had Chris Long of the Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champions. They play Washington twice a year, and Chris hasn't said two words about the horrors of Washington's football team in his entire career. He's been in the league for a decade. So there's a lot to go over here, and I am very interested to learn and know what my folks can do to help, and what are the best ways to attack it, and how big is this problem, and how does this hurt indigenous people of erasure? Anyone want to take the ball and run with it off that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I actually started, but I was on mute. Yeah, I think there's two subject matters there topics I think that come to mind on this conversation that you've chosen here, and it's not just about erasure; it's about injustice. But I can't help but think about the movement that the power of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how it is not necessarily crossed over to embrace some of what has taken place with Native people, missing and murdered Indigenous women, some of the injustices, not only Native people at the hands of militarized police like at Standing Rock, but even some of the trials, two that come to mind on the Canadian side with Colton Bushy and Tina Fontaine, where the killers of these people were acquitted in a really, really lopsided court proceedings, and that has not gained any traction in barely in any media, but certainly when you think about the advocacy that has been out there for Black Lives Matter, this would have been a good place to pull it in. Now, I acknowledge that Black Lives Matter did have a presence at Standing Rock, but it didn't gain the traction that it could have. So there's that. And then, of course, with some of the work that Julie does and others on the appropriation issue with mascot issues, I think the whole mascot issue and the failure of getting black athletes and black fans engaged in that conversation is again, it's problematic, and it leaves us in a very, as a marginalized people, even being marginalized by other people of color who could certainly step up.
just came, there was a screening tonight of the film documentary Dolores, about Dolores Huerta and her activism and organization with the farm workers, and how she was, not very many people know who she was, but she was right up there with Cesar Chavez during that whole movement. And something that she mentioned in the film was how connected all the groups were in the 60s movement, and they all communicated, and they pretty much joined together and to make all these things happen, and they didn't do them alone or by themselves. And I think that's what we're lacking here. We don't have a larger movement made up of smaller movements. We're kind of silos.
That's a great point. It reminds me of a couple things. One is a brother by the name of Ray Robinson.
Reason might be that there's a disconnect in, like, I guess coalitions are joining. I think it could be various things. I mean, like for Cesar Chavez, for example, I know that he's put out there as a symbol of, like, activism, but at some point he called our people wetbacks. So even in his head, he had a division already set up, undocumented, documented. To me, that's not relevant because, I mean, I don't care about a squatters nation's paperwork. So it could be maybe similar aspects where we have all this division because this society does divide us into sections, and like how Nolan said that. How do we discuss indigenous erasure? Well, indigenous erasure in so-called Latin America, in my opinion, pretty much almost complete. Unless you live in a recognized as an indigenous person, which means you live in what that colonial system considers an indigenous section. So once you're in the city, for some reason, you're not indigenous anymore, even though you never left the continent. So I don't know if there's things like that are going on. Erasure, for example, media. What are some of our people are called Latinos, Hispanics, and then the really insulting term mestizo. And then on top of that, even if people break off from that idea, there's still colonial identities based on borders created by Europeans. So that's even another, like nationalism based on remnants of colonial entities. Literally, people can't break off of that sometimes. So I don't know if that has to do with, like, people not really joining in together, because even if people, let's say, African people will say, like, oh, I'll support DACA, you know, because they don't have whatever, that program's good, but even maybe in certain people's head, it's like they don't even realize that. What about DACA? Like, we're beyond that already. Like, we're asking permission still to be on the continent.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good point.
Cause even like sometimes I see like people saying certain things. I might like, why are you supporting people in DACA? They don't support us, and you know, the negative arguments like that, right? But when you really go through the true argument, it's like, well, no, we're from this continent. Like, there's nothing to, you know what I'm saying? Like that. It's almost like a missing chunk of history that people don't realize. That they're fighting and bickering about certain things that at the end of the day, historically, it's like, no, it's our continent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you bring up a couple of good points, and that is, you know, this idea of trying to use the oppressive system to fight oppression, which doesn't make any sense. And you know, and we see that in the federal recognition process. We see it in a lot of these, you know, quote unquote tribes that are so indoctrinated into whether it's Indian Reorganization Act style governments or their relationship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the federal government. Their constant, you know, efforts to run to Washington for legislative fixes to previous legislative policies that have caused harm to our people. You know, and even even trying to use that court system to solve things like land claims and some of these things. You know, it's one thing when a white man who's committed a crime against a Native person is in that system, but it's another thing when we totally embed ourselves into trying to use these colonial systems to solve our problems, because they don't. I mean, I even got into a debate today with another Native person who was, saying that, we should boycott Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods because they don't support our Second Amendment rights. And I said, I don't have Second Amendment rights. I said, but as far as I'm concerned, disarm them all. It levels the playing field more than anything. I'm the whole idea of a Native person, trying to take a position to, assert their constitutional rights as well. Not my constitution, not my president, not my, not rights given to me by a white man. And I had Roxanne Dunbar Keys on my program today in New York, and she has written a book called Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment. And she goes on to talk about how the origins of the Second Amendment and gun rights was about stealing. It was for the purpose of stealing land and stealing the belongings of Native people. It was for the purpose of controlling the slave population. It wasn't about militias and fighting tyranny. It was about completing and protecting the theft that they're already engaged in. So it's ironic that the truest use of the Second Amendment is more associated with organized crime, whether it's mafioso or whether it's urban gangs. They're actually using the Second Amendment to its intent than anyone. I mean, so it kind of shows how wrong that is represented. So, but I agree that when we try to use those systems to solve our problems or to advocate some of those systems, we're just putting our head in there in that very noose that they've created for us.
When I see, it reminds me of, I guess, it's not a new phrase, but the phrase is being used a lot more than it has in recent years by leftists or revolutionaries, activists, what have you. Vote them out. And while for the time being that is all we can do since the system still exists, but at the same time, whoever you're voting in, you're talking about the U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate, Congress, people, governors, etc. You're still going to vote in a person of color who's going to sell out his or her people, or you're still going to vote in a racist white person. So it's like it's like John alluded to, these are not our systems, these are not our ideologies at all. And what Julie was talking about at the beginning, I had two memories in my mind. One of them was about Ray Robinson, who was a black activist back in the day, and he only lived to be 35 years old. He died on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1973, and he was an ally to Native people. He was helping Native people out on said reservation, and because of the centuries of misinformation and pitting both of us against each other by the U.S. government, there was some confusion and delusion, and he ended up being killed because some Native folks thought, oh wait, he's an informant, we got to take him out. And there's a bunch of clouds about exactly how he died, but that's basically the gist of it. And then the other thing I was reminded of was I was up in Oakland I think it was late 2016. It was the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther Party, and they had the members of the original Rainbow Coalition, not this liberal, black liberal Jesse Jackson thing going on. Black Panther Party members from them, American Indian Movement, Lenny Foster, who happens to be Leonard Peltier's spiritual guide or spiritual advisor, the Young Lords, Asian American Political Alliance. There was even the Palestinian Liberation Organization member there as well, and they all spoke. And that's what needs to happen, as John said in the very beginning. We all need to be on the same page. The same system is beating us down. It's not, 15 different systems from 15 different ways. It's the same. This is the United States and white colonialism just beating us in the ground. And seeing how powerful that was in the 60s, in Julie, when you were talking about how it wasn't just, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Claudia Colvin and Rosa Parks. It wasn't just black folks trying to get free. There's a lot of different groups, and in just some areas, these groups were actually together. And they were, of course, broken up by the federal government, but because they were scared to death that, if they band together, they could actually tear this thing down. So that's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. It has to be us. It has to be us, and we have to be on the same page to take this thing apart.
The only thing I could say about that is, and not referring to the historical moment, but like referring to like if that were to occur again, I'm not quite sure if other groups want the same thing as indigenous people. Because at the end of the day, a lot of those groups just want the American dream. I don't want the American dream. I don't want to be accepted. That's not what I'm looking for. And sometimes they're just looking to be accepted and live the American dream, have a picket fence, have a good job. That's about it. I don't know if they're really thinking about this is indigenous land and it belongs to indigenous people.
Well, I think you make a great point, because rather than saying that we are all fighting for the same thing, I think we have to recognize in the effort to come together is that we support each other in those individual battles, because we may not want the same thing, but I do want to support black people in what they are trying to get. I do want to support the Latino or Chicano community in what they are trying to accomplish, even if it's not the same thing. So immigration stuff, look, that's not my issue necessarily, but I still want to make sure that
That might not be your issue, but hold on. That might not be your issue, but I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to interject. The fact that you're looking at me as an immigrant, I can't see how anybody...
No, you're not understanding what I'm saying.
Because we're not Latinos. That's the
you're
thing.
not understanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want to support that.
We're not immigrants and we're not Latinos. So, at the end of the day, I'm an indigenous person. I might not be in a truck. Why? Because they destroyed everything. I've looked up. My bloodline at some point comes from the Pima people. I can't be in their tribe. Why? Because I don't know how I connect to them. But at the end of the day, that's what I'm saying. As an indigenous person saying a Latino person, I don't have the same battle. What does? We have the same battle. We're literally the same people. Some of the people you see as Latino actually have more blood than people in tribes. Think about the backwardness of that.
Yeah, I think what John is alluding to is what the battles that we fight are different in that they're trying to deport Mexicans or Ecuadorians or whoever, and they're not necessarily trying to deport natives here in this country, but they're doing other things that are causing us to die. Basically, it's just a different type of assault.
Well, all right. No, but my point is, since I'm being called out on this thing.
One at a time.
I'm done here.
Yeah, but they're stealing the material from everywhere in the continent, not just from what is called Turtle Island. It's the whole continent. It's being, every day they're stealing material from it. There's people down in Mexico having the whole water issue too. So that's what I'm saying. Indigenous people are going through the same assault. They genocided Mayan people in the 80s. That's yesterday.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because for one, everybody on this panel and most of the people that we work with within the movement, we're all fighting for that same thing, that one thing being liberation. But Yari's alluding to the fact that non-white Latinos, Hispanics, whatever terminology that wants to be used there, are in fact native, because just if you break it down simplistically, the Spanish came over, their Spanish people are white. So if you have a Mexican person or a Peruvian or whomever, the color had to come from somewhere, the color being indigenous. John was just saying that while you have people who call themselves Latino, Hispanic, Mexicans, Guatemalans being deported, we should support the fact that they shouldn't get deported. Not so much support the very, very complex depths of colonialism inside that. What race are you? What they call themselves Mexicans here, but then we're looking at it over here going, well, okay, you Mexican, right, but at the same time, aren't you indigenous as well? But I think the crux of the matter is that immigration for people of color, including black folks, you have the poor communities in black communities, native communities, so-called Latino communities, racism in Muslim communities, violence, racial violence, all these different issues, as John is saying. We should support them because a lot of these issues are the same thing. We suffer this same thing or similar things. And looking at the big picture, I think these discussions are needed, just trying to get through the muddied grass to try to figure out exactly how to do this, because you're talking about 5 centuries of a double genocide that has morphed into, okay, anti-Muslim, the Chinese Exclusion Act, make them build the railroads free, all this other stuff, anti-woman, anti-gay, all this stuff. It's the same, it's the same thing. We're just trying to liberate ourselves. I think learning from one another, from each group, is very key. But at the same time, if it's a basic struggle like immigration, especially since, as you already alluded to, these people are, if you break it down simplistically, are indigenous people, and they're being deported out of their own, off their own land. Whether just, hey, I have a house here now, so you're going to take me off and put me somewhere else where my people aren't even from. To John's point, we should support them because that's just wrong. I mean, taking people out of this
if I could speak, so I could kind of represent what I was trying to say.
Go ahead.
Without being interrupted. I mean, my point is that not everybody is fighting for the same thing, because some people are fighting for Americanism. They are fighting for that American dream, including people from other countries, including other indigenous people, immigrants, or whatever you want to call them. So while I'm not trying to condemn somebody for returning to another part of their homeland, I know that many people, the DACA stuff is about people wanting to become Americans. They aren't trying to liberate themselves as indigenous people, and that's flat out. That's just the way it is. Many people within some of these other communities, the LGBT community, the black community, They're fighting for civil rights under the U.S. Constitution. As a Native person, I'm not fighting for that. So that is my point. But even though I'm not fighting for the same thing that they're fighting for, although, and I will say, many Native people are fighting for that. Many people support this federal recognition process to be a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. That's not me. So my point is, I can still support people who are fighting for what they desire, and support them, even if we're not fighting for the same thing. So I don't want to be thrown under a bus because somebody thinks that I'm calling down another people of color. That's not what I'm doing here. So I'm a little offended about the interruption and being trampled over, because that's not what I was saying there. So that was what I wanted to say.
Understood. I could see the same stuff in Africa with the really gravitating towards colonialism, gravitating towards a democratic system, a white system of government, taking capitalism to heart, materialism to heart, and forgetting who we are and who we were, and not trying to liberate ourselves and understand who we are and accept who we are and be proud of who we are. That's why the recent news that with the new South African leadership, we are getting fighting to get a lot of our land back from the colonizers. And in those steps, okay, then we're seeing, yeah, here we go. That's in terms of the the revolutionary side of the table that I think we're all on. That's what we need to see. That's what we need to do. And one point I don't want to leave out of this entire discussion tonight, when it comes to having an alliance with Native people, whether you're black, Palestinian, whatever, if you live in this country, the first thing that should enter your mind, and it should stay there, is that it's native land. So, whatever post-America picture you want to paint, it needs to be painted with an indigenous brush.
Mm-hmm.
And these are not easy issues to break down or hammer out or figure out. I've been doing this stuff for only 2 years, so like, by comparison to other folks, including on this panel, so barely at all. And one thing that I had learned that hit me in the head is that there are a lot of these issues are not going to be solved overnight. A lot of these issues aren't black and white, easy to figure out. So these type of forums, unlike the one I mentioned at the 50th Black Panther celebration, Black Panther Party, probably should put those two separately so we know what we're talking about. The movie and then the Black Panther Party. But seeing that original Rainbow Coalition together and what Fred Hampton was putting together, that to me is the way to do it. Because in that setting, you had a bunch of revolutionaries, you had indigenous voices being heard, which is a rarity, and you had the struggle, an international struggle against colonialism, against white supremacy, an equation being formulated, basically. And, okay, so you say that you're going through this stuff in your place, and we're going through this stuff in our place. That's kind of similar. Let's, and we just keep learning from one another and continue to figure out the equation to tear this thing apart. Now, when you guys alluded to the fact that, yeah, there are a lot of people, and I would probably say the majority of people in activism in the United States, if it's more left than right, do support that American dream. They do say, you know, our democracy, what's happening to our democracy, this is our Constitution. All this, well, honestly, nonsense. John, you said this isn't my Constitution. I second that. I'm not 3/5 of a human being. To hell with the Constitution. But back to the original point, looking at how black folks can help indigenous people with this problem of erasure and, as John said, injustice. What can we do? What other of the few things that we are doing? What are the other things that we should do to help this problem, end this problem?
Well, I think two of the things that I alluded to earlier was it would be great to have a better synergy between Black Lives Matter and some of the social injustice issues that Native people are experiencing, some that are exactly the same in terms of death by cop and that kind of thing, but certainly the militarized police forces, but even the lack of prosecution against crimes that are committed by white people against Native people. That would go a long way, and because there's nothing that erases a person more than being killed. So I think that would be helpful. But I think on another front that I think there should be more synergy would be on the mascot issue, because I don't consider the mascot issue a trivial issue, an issue just of discomfort or being offended. It has real, long-standing negative impact, not just on Native kids, but on the way Native people are viewed by the dominant cultures around us. And so until we can get more participation from the black community, athletes, fans, and everybody, to understand what is wrong with that cultural appropriation, and not just the teams that appropriate it. You alluded to the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, one of the most classic examples of what's wrong with mascot issues is that crazy Philadelphia fan who impales an Indian head and takes it to a football game, hoists it up with this impaled Indian head that says Redskin, Deadskin every time the Eagles played the Redskins. He did the same thing when the Philadelphia Flyers played the Blackhawks in a hockey game. He's got his picture put on as the background graphic to the scores going into commercial breaks. And so it's not just the teams that appropriate the name, it's how the teams that compete against those teams. That's where you get ready for another Trail of Tears banners hoisted up. I mean, nobody would ever say get ready for another train ride to Auschwitz if you were playing a team that had some sort of Jewish affiliation. But see, this is the stuff, again, an impaled Indian head. Nobody would accept a black head in a noose at a football game, but you can impale an Indian head, and nobody openly condemned it, and certainly not the people of color. You can see people sitting around this fanatic hoisting this thing up, and people thinking it's funny.
And nobody, and that incites violence against Native people. It just does. It says it's okay to do that type of thing, and little kids see that, and families see that, and it's horrendous.
There was a black dude who passed within the last 2 years. I don't remember his name. I don't care to. But his nickname was Chief Z. And he was a big Washington fan, went to a lot of the games. I remember seeing him as a kid in one of the Super Bowl highlight footage videos. And he had a big headdress, fake Native war paint. And as a child, I'm going, there's nothing wrong with this, right? It's football. They've won a few Super Bowls. That's all we're doing here, right? But that's the common thought. That's how most people in this country of any color view the mascot issue and that team. And one thing that absolutely, and it still disgusts me because I know it goes on every day. I spent 2 months in Washington within the last year or so, and it was during football season. There were so many black folks in Washington football apparel. It drove me crazy. I mean, I'm a broken record when I say this, but it's the equivalent of seeing Native people wearing New York niggers apparel. I mean, the N-word is as bad as the R-word, and both words have violent connotations behind them when they're used by non-Native or black people. To Julie's point about it does incite violence, even self-harming violence of Native kids. It skyrockets already high suicide rates.
And to the point of this conversation, what it promotes is erasure, because that's exactly what it is. Because nobody's dressing up as Greg Deal or John Kane or Julie Dye. They're dressing up in this image of what America has embraced as what they have turned us into. I mean, it always makes me go back to the L. Frank Baum genocide editorials. L. Frank Baum being the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, who basically called for the extermination and then the annihilation of Indians, of Native people, after the murder of Sitting Bull, saying that basically all the good Indians are dead. And, it would be better to wipe out these untamed and untamable creatures so we could live on in the memories of Americana, so we could be embraced by, in the image of James Fenimore Cooper, these grand kings of the forest and plains, rather than continue to exist as the whining cur that licks the hand that smites them. That's the way he said it. He basically said we are better off being annihilated because our manhood had been effaced. We were degraded, and that we simply didn't deserve to live, and that America would be doing more justice to the Native people by exterminating us and then propping up this image of who they think we were, which is exactly what the mascot issue does. So everybody who puts on a Washington Redskins jersey or a Cleveland Indian hat is saying that's what an Indian is. That's what a Native person is. We're going to ignore the fact that we still exist. We have been dehumanized, and we have been erased as a surviving and a thriving people. And we're being cast into this fake pan-Indian image that Americana has created for us.
It's like that quote by Thomas Jefferson, this unfortunate race whom we had been taking so much pains to save and to civilize have, by their unexpected desertion and ferocious barbarities, justified extermination and now await our decision on their fate. And Jefferson is a beloved figure in this country.
He's the enlightened one.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. And I think from the standpoint of, especially our two people, our problems being so similar or at times exactly the same, Jefferson co-authored the Indian Removal Act. He also was the ginormous slave owner and had child slaves and raped a child slave and Sally Hemings and forced her to have children. So that man alone, being continually praised throughout history, is beating both of us in the face. And
then to carve his face into the Black Hills along with three other presidents who are every bit as guilty as he was is just a slap in the face even more.
That's right there.
Nolan, who is the athlete that wore the Caucasian shirt on ESPN?
Oh, he's a pundit, Bomani Jones, very intelligent brother.
Oh, right. Now, see, that was beautiful.
Yeah,
that was just beautiful.
It was, yeah. And that created T-shirts, and I still see hats for sale with the Caucasian thing on it, and And yeah, that was really. And you know what? We're so underrepresented as far as in journalists or sportscasters or anybody that brings something like that to light and brings our issues to light and puts it out in front of everybody. I mean, that all helps, and there's so little of it. And
well, and that's why I was mentioning, I think the effort that Colin Kaepernick put forward in his protest, he was very inclusive of people of color in general. He didn't limit it to Black Lives Matter. When he was raising the issue, he was raising the issues of injustice of all people of color. And it didn't matter that, again, I believe that Native people, the people that I work with, not all Native people, many of the people that I work with, are fighting for decolonization and liberation in the truest sense of the word, not just social justice. There's different levels of that. But even as I'm promoting decolonization, it doesn't mean that I don't fight for social justice and that I don't address the issues of cultural appropriation and, and frankly, violence against people of color and violence against women and that kind of stuff. Of course I'm going to stand with those issues. And that's where, I think this is the greatest opportunity for us to stand together on this stuff. I think there has been missed opportunity in terms of the relationship between Native people and even, what Colin Kaepernick's efforts have been. Obviously, he was invited to do the sunrise ceremony at Alcatraz this year, and I think that sent a good message as well. But Bomani Jones wearing that Caucasian shirt has been around for a number of years, but he sparked life into this idea of showing how the absurdity of what cultural appropriation is in terms of the mascot issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think, and since everybody else on the panel other than me is indigenous, looking at coming together as different people of color, as Malcolm X said, Fred Hampton was doing, trying to talk it out in terms of decolonizing, not so much, not aligning with, I don't know, someone like John Lewis or Chairman Archambault of Standing Rock, who sold out Standing Rock Reservation, talking more about people like John Kane, Julie Dye, Illari, Chaska, people of color who want to be liberated and the people to be liberated and other people of color to be liberated. Basically what I'm asking is how much stock should be put into that type of effort nationally, trying to come together as people of color, but talking it out and hearing the ideas of how to liberate ourselves from this system and this genocidal structure?
Well, I think part of it is managing to break through some of the gatekeepers that keep those conversations from happening. I think there are opportunities, and there should be better outreach for any one of us who are advancing an issue of decolonization or social justice or whatever else. We should be clear that we can't do it alone, that we do need allies, and oftentimes not only are we specifically lined up because of our exact own experiences, but even if we don't have the exact same experiences, there are reasons for us to align. And I think we have to make sure that we reach out and we somehow can broach the subject with those people who are the gatekeepers of some of these movements.
That's a good point. And I've seen that happen positively, and I've seen that happen negatively. Either just seeing other people involved in that effort, where a Native person or Native issues are tried to be brought up to a gatekeeper from the Black community, or gatekeepers or organization, whatever. And most of the time, it goes the bad way. What are they doing for us? I don't really know anything about their issues. We have to worry about ours. It's hard to call us selfish in that standpoint, but at the same time, we kind of are being out for ourselves. If you're talking about injustice in this country, you cannot leave out indigenous people, just like you can't leave out black people. That's what gets me so hot when I do see that, what happens the majority of the time. When a gatekeeper from the black community, whether it be a person or an organization, and the issue is brought up about Native people, Native genocide, we need to align with them, we need to help them, we need to, for one, help us because more numbers, but also we need to put their situation on the front page. But that's what gets me so hot because, hey, they were here first. Y'all were here first. This is still your land. We were then forcibly brought here against our will. Neither genocide that still happens to this day should be erased or belittled.
And along those same lines, if we could get the attention of the Black Lives Matter group, our people have to embrace this situation and help the Black Lives Matter cause also. It doesn't just go one way. We have to join and help each other. We don't. Of course, we don't have the resources that the larger groups have, and we're pretty much the activists that are working now and stretched very thin. But like I said, we have to embrace each other. It can't be just a one-way thing.
And we represent a very small population in the areas, in the urban areas. A lot of our population are in very remote areas that it's very difficult to have attention called to the position that we take on these issues. And even on the mascot issue, it's real easy for somebody to come up with a token Native person who says, "Oh yeah, I love the Washington Redskins," or "I love the Cleveland Indians," and and the media will prop that person up. So we do have to reach out more, and we do have to address these issues. Nolan, you talk about this again. People, the black experience in terms of slavery and everything else. I hear the governor of the state of New York, I've heard the president of the United States, going back to Barack Obama, refer to people that the United States is a country of immigrants, and that unless you're a Native person, you immigrated here. Well, I'm sorry, black people didn't immigrate here during the slave trade. They were kidnapped and hauled in chains here. Mm-hmm. So even when the black president stands up and says that, it's like, are you kidding me? You can't discern the difference. So, but again, I think that we have to stand in solidarity on some of these issues, whether it's at the immigration debate, or whether it's the Black Lives Matter debate, or whether it's the again, missing and murdered Indigenous women, or the mascot issue. I do think not just the Black Lives Matter, but specifically, I would have liked to seen a better effort to take Colin Kaepernick and the stance that he took and the attention that he drew to his protest, and I would have loved to have heard at least a mention of the mascot issue, but that never entered even into that conversation.
The Washington was on Sunday Night Football, which is the highest rated football broadcast of all the major networks who do the NFL. They were on Sunday Night Football on NBC 3 times this past season. They played on Thanksgiving this season. They were very visible during these protests of the last 2 years. Even certain players on Washington were a part of the protests. This is the biggest bunch of hypocrisy I've ever seen, including Josh Norman, who is the all-world defensive player for Washington, and he when he signed with the team originally a couple of years ago, he said, "No, I don't have a problem with the name. My my grandmother was Native. My great grandmother." He sounded like a white person. It's like, no, I'm 100th Cherokee, so I can say something. And then he said one of the most disrespectful things I've ever heard, and it came from a black person. He said, I think it's kind of funny. I'm a R word playing for the R words. So that's the level of disconnect that happened with these NFL protests to take a knee. The first game of the season that just ended was the Chiefs and the Patriots, and you saw Patriots and Chiefs players on the Chiefs take a knee, and you're looking at people on the Chiefs going, "Huh? Do you know what you're wearing? What's going through your head?"
Mm-hmm.
It's very. I mean, it's discouraging for me because a lot of my work has to do with trying to bring our two people together. But then I look at y'all. I can only imagine how discouraging that actually is when you're a Native person.
Well, and there's actually an argument that gets made by the people who favor these names and these mascots to say, if we eliminate them, then somehow that is an erasure of who we are. I've heard, some of these guys, this Andre Bilodeau and some of these other people who have raised these issues and tried to say that by keeping us as mascots, it somehow makes us relevant and in the public eye, not understanding that what they're putting in the public eye is not who we are. It is not a real identity. It's not who we are as a real and alive and a living people. It is a pan-Indian version of something that, like I said, Americans try to create for us so they can pretend that we are their history and that we have no history, no presence, and no future of our own, except for within the context of the United States and the Constitution and all the other stuff. And I mean, hell, they put us on the freaking lines, and they're still doing it with Sacagawea, and they still are trying to do it in their culture.
I think we may have lost John. Go ahead, Julie.
Well, they actually think that this is an educational thing for society, is to put these mascots out there. And same way with this, like the Fountain of the Pioneers in Kalamazoo that we're fighting. It's this picture of this colonist standing over a chief with a club, a weapon, and it's like, well, you can't take that away from us because that's how we get educated. We need to remember that, and that's what happened. Manifest Destiny. And we need to learn from that, so you can't take it away. Like, oh my God, it's so, that's not me up there. It's not my people. It's not my story. It's not my history. And it's just, it's amazing. It's amazing how they twisted it around.
Well, and even that whole idea that they try to suggest that this using these names and appropriating our culture has been some effort to honor us, and it isn't. And and I'm quick to cite that at the same period of time that grade schools, high schools, colleges, and pro teams were appropriating these names was the exact same time of the era of the residential schools and the boarding schools, where the policy was kill the Indian, save the man. So it was about putting us away in American history, to eliminate that in our daily lives, to strip our language, to strip our culture, to rip our hair out and take our clothing and anything that would identify us as Native people. At the same time, little white kids got to put mama's lipstick on their face for war paint, beat their Quaker Oats cans for tom-toms, and wielding, fake tomahawks playing Indians. It was okay for white kids to do it, but Native kids were being beaten for that. And so when I hear anybody say, "Well, we've had that name or we've had that town seal for 70 or 80 years," and it's like they say, "No, that's ours now." I've literally heard high schools who said, "No, we are Redskins, you aren't." And and while they might be correct with the latter because it is a misuse of words, they actually want to take ownership of that imagery, of that word, of that of everything that goes along with it because they believe they own it.
Right, right. Well, that's what they yelled at us in Pawpaw. We're the mighty, mighty Redskins, and they told us that we should be tarred and feathered and run out of town. The Native people that attended those school board meetings. Yeah,
it's crazy. Well, and this, and that's where it gets down to, because, like I said, as much as we're suggesting in this conversation about outreach, we understand that sometimes within our own population, we have people that, that don't necessarily share those views. I consider every American flag I see flying on, whether it's at the headquarters of the Standing Rock Sioux or the Seneca Nation, every time I see American flags flying on our buildings, I think that's part of that erasure, because we're promoting them and we're promoting the United States as our superiors, and that's part of that erasure. I think and I understand people have different feelings about that. I mean, I don't think Native people should enlist in their armed forces. I don't think we should vote in their elections. I don't think that we should be their parishioners in their churches. But that's my view, and I think that to not understand how that all participates in the erasure of our people and in the ethnic cleansing of our people is part of that cognitive dissonance.
I have the same thought when I see black athletes at the Olympics who represent America embrace the American flag and wear it. I get a little nauseous. To me, it's like seeing a Jewish person during the Holocaust wear a swastika around themselves, because we are still under genocide, as are y'all. And I think that's why talking with each other from both of our people and other people of color is important, because I've thought these things, one regarding seeing the American flag on reservations, Native people embracing it, and I'm going, huh? Why are they doing that? But better to hear from an actual Native person and Native people, their thoughts on the subject, or what Illari was bringing up earlier, how if you're a non-white, Latino, Hispanic, whatever, you're indigenous, and I have had I've thought that for a while, because I just broke it down, and oh wait, yeah, never thought about that. But I'm not indigenous, I'm not Mexican, so I'll hang back here and I may ask the question, put it out there, but we should learn from the people that it actually affects. Hence, this native erasure topic.
Well, yeah, but sorry. No, that's exactly how the point that you just brought up. I hear talk about ethnocide. I heard talk about how the red skin is an offensive word, and it is. It's ugly. It's horrible. So is Latino. It's the same thing. The Latino label is cultural genocide. It is. And it's an identity forced on people. Just the other day, as it was being mentioned, how it is true, indigenous, what is pictured by the society is like, when I say native, right, like people have different pictures, they separate, they throw Hispanic, Latino. You're not that, you're not. But what's happening to what if I say native, and what people picture in their head is ugly, right? With all the cases of the native missing women. But I started thinking the other day, well, how are so-called Latinos portrayed on TV? It's not pretty. nobody portrays the Latina on TV as intelligent. They portray Latinas as, here's your spicy Latina, here's your sexualized object. And what's her name? Sofia Vergara, whatever the hell her name is?
Yeah.
She's not even freaking of indigenous blood on top of that. But she's over here trying to portray people like me as stupid and something to objectify. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's happening to indigenous people throughout the continent in different subsections, right? That was the whole point. That's why, to me, the Latino Hispanic is extremely offensive, and then mestizo would be even like worse. It is the same as redskin. You call me Latina, it's the same. It's the same crap. It's the same thing. That's why, like, I'm not an immigrant. How am I going to be an immigrant to the continent?
I think, and all those words you just said, the mainstream, black people included, don't see a problem with any of those words.
And it's not necessarily their fault either. It's just that's how it's pushed.
Oh yeah, complete
I mean,
indoctrination.
we're talking about like cultural genocide, right? There's at some point people like me don't know that they're indigenous. So obviously, those labels have been very successful in culturally genociding indigenous people.
I can empathize. When I hear African American, I cringe because you're compounding and jumbling up 54 nations and 1 billion people. I said, no, it's Africa, just Africa. There's nothing else going on over there. And then you're going to call us American when you don't even consider us an American to begin with. So I can empathize for that.
That's why I asked you the other session was if there was like a word that would be more respectful to call, instead of like, I don't know, if like African encompasses maybe something that truly embraces like, because now like what do you have people in South Africa? I'm an Afrikaner, like
yeah. Well,
I'm not sitting here going, like, what the hell?
That's like the whole Latino, Hispanic instead of Native issue. It's so complicated because you look at Africa and black folks. I have an idea of where my ancestors are from in West Africa. My father's family's from Tennessee. The slave ships that went to Tennessee are from West Africa, but I have no idea what nation I'm from. So we, a lot of black revolutionaries will call ourselves Africans. I stick with black personally. We're dark skinned, black. There you go, simple. I'll even say Negro. I don't, unless a white person uses the word, because there's negative connotations behind it. I look at Negro in Spanish. It means black. Okay, colored. I'm colored. But I usually the main one, and I just stick with black. But that's such another complicated issue with a bunch of wires all entangled, because Africa looks just like Turtle Island in South America, looks completely different than it did before it was colonized, and all the different nations and tribes and systems of government in different nations. We don't know where we come from. So if a Native person who says, "Okay, I'm Ojibwe, I'm Cherokee," and thank God they do know, that person does know. Okay, that's who I am. That's where I come from. Most of us, we'll just pick a place on the map and just pretend I'm from Mali, or I'm from Zimbabwe. we so often don't know. But that's just how complicated all this stuff can get, and how I guess when you're dealing with something that complicated, and when there's that many unknowns, things are very hard to figure out, and it's hard to agree of what what it should be or what it is. But back to as we close the topic at hand, if we could go around the table, and I won't speak because I'm not indigenous, but if each of you could give 1 point of how to, and I guess try to simplify it if you can, how to stop native erasure, and just how can black folks help stop it. I'd start with Julie. Yes.
Well, I think education is the big thing that we're lacking, because people don't know we even exist, and they don't know anything about our cultures, our nations, our traditions, our languages. They know very little. If you ask the average person off the street, name 5 tribes, they might name 2 or 3 if you're lucky, and there's no way they're going to get 573. It's just, I talk to legislators and politicians and people with PhDs, and they're absolutely clueless about Native people. They haven't been taught anything, and they haven't learned anything or taken it upon themselves to learn anything. So I think education, and our own people included, our own people are so colonized and so screwed up from what they've been through in the past that they don't know anything about themselves at all. They may have brown skin, but they know absolutely nothing about where they came from. And so I think tribes have a responsibility to educate their own, which they haven't in a lot of cases. But society in general, it needs to bring the books up to speed and the education system up to speed to teach about what they haven't taught, and that includes Black history also. And I think that needs to be at the forefront as we have more educators in the Black community and in the Native community that with higher positions and louder voices and can maybe get the issue out there and start raising hell and just saying, hey, we've got to change this education. We have to let people know that we exist, and the prominent voices can do that. Like I said, journalists, sportscasters, educators, anybody in a prominent position that their voice will be listened to.
Sean?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I'd like to see some of what I think are the not just the prominent but the powerful Black voices out there, the Colin Kaepernicks, the Killer Mikes, some of these guys who I think get it. And if we had some of those gatekeepers allow conversations to happen with some of the Native voices, I'd love to engage some of these guys in conversation, but I'd rather not see them, stuck with a bunch of Suzanne Harjos and Sherman Alexie's, because they'll never get to the root of the issue because they've already watered down so many of the Native issues. So I'd like to see some powerful voices from the Native communities, the indigenous communities, stand with some of the powerful voices in the Black communities to share the stories and to share and do just what Julie was talking about, the education, because we're not going to get that education through through Lewis and Sharpton and these guys. They're too self-serving on those kinds of things. So I think that's part of it. And again, I think Black Lives Matter having a little bit more outreach to missing and murdered Indigenous women and some of the social injustice issues and the prosecutions and that kind of stuff, the failed prosecutions against the death of Native people would be a big deal. And again, I think getting the black community to condemn. I mean, Killer Mike's in Atlanta. That's the Braves, right? I mean, you've got Colin Kaepernick, who is spending a great deal of time on the East Coast where some of these teams are, and I just think that there's a better, if we could connect with some of those voices, I think it would be easier to have this conversation be a little bit more broad-based in the black community. And I think it would, I mean, again, one guy on television wearing the Caucasians T-shirt had a huge impact. But then what follows up with that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my thoughts.
Illari?
What I could say is it'll be helpful if if the African community could see, because it's kind of hard because somebody mentioned education, right? So, it'll be helpful to stop promoting the cultural genocide of indigenous people by using those terms, Latino, Hispanic, or promoting or saying, hey, you're mestizo or something like that. That'd be really helpful. I mean, because it's the basic 101s on things that we're just not that. And anything that perpetuates that is just killing mine and other people's indigenousness.
And one thing I'll say to close out, I consider all three of y'all powerful voices, as well as the other folks who frequent this panel. And certainly a lively Red and Black Roundtable tonight. And I'm thankful that we had this one. I'm thankful for all of them, and I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you hopefully back on here very soon.
Thank you, Nolan.
Yahweh.
Okay,
Yahweh.
Peace.